Game Theory Class 3, Video 3. In this video we're going to talk about dominant strategies. So let's begin with the definition. So, a weakly dominant strategy is a strategy which weakly dominates all of the other strategies. So this is very similar to, it's just a mild extension to the definition that we had last time of the strategy A dominating strategy B. Now, instead of just comparing two strategies, we sort of compare all of them at the same time. So we say a weakly dominant strategy is a strategy which weakly dominates all of the other strategies. And similarly, a strictly dominant strategy is a strategy that strictly dominates all of the other strategies. So it's very similar to what we did last time, but instead of just comparing two strategies, instead of just comparing A and B, we compare all of them. So if there's like A, B, C, D, then for A to be strictly dominant, A needs to strictly dominate B and C and D and E. It needs to strictly dominate all of them to be called strictly dominant. Just a side note, it's sort of a bit trivial, but I just want to point it out. Every strictly dominant strategy is also a weakly dominant strategy. Every strictly dominant strategy is also a weakly dominant strategy. Right? It's harder to be strictly dominant than it is to be weakly dominant. The converse of this is not true, of course. And I want to again mention that I write the word weakly in parentheses because sometimes it's common practice to not write it at all. Sometimes you read just people saying a dominant strategy. And if you see that, then it's understood that they mean a weakly dominant strategy. So let's do an example of this. This is the example we looked at in the last video. This game right here, this 3x3 game. Player 1 has 3 strategies, A, B, and C. Player 2 has 3 strategies, X, Y, and Z. And the question is to calculate all of the dominant and strictly dominant strategies. Well, if you recall from last time, we know that, what do we know? We know that C strictly dominates B, and C weakly dominates A. Okay, we calculated this last time. And we also know that Y strictly dominates X, Y strictly dominates Z, and X weakly dominates Z. Okay? So, what does this mean in terms of being like a dominant strategy? Well, let's consider this first set of data. Okay? The fact that C strictly dominates B and it weakly dominates A means that C is a weakly dominant strategy. Okay? Because it weakly dominates all of the other strategies. If this here instead was C strictly dominates A, then C would be a strictly dominant strategy. But it's not. So C is a weakly dominant strategy. And then if we consider player 2 strategies, from this bit of information right here, we see that Y strictly dominates X and Y strictly dominates Z. So that means Y is strictly better than all the other strategies available. So this means that Y is a strictly dominant strategy. Okay. And that's it. That's the answer to the question. Calculate all the dominant and strictly dominant strategies. So C is a dominant strategy and Y is a strictly dominant strategy. Before I finish, I want to mention a theorem which can be useful in calculating dominant strategies. Personally, I don't use this theorem that much, but some people find it useful. Okay, so it just says a weakly dominant strategy is a strategy that is always a best response to all of the opponent strategies. I say A because remember, there might be more than one best response. There are cases where there's equal payoff and there can be multiple best responses. So a weakly dominant strategy is a strategy that is a best response to all of the opponent's strategies. And a strictly dominant strategy is a strategy which is the unique best response to each of the opponent's strategies, to all of the opponent's strategies. Okay? So the idea of this is sometimes if you know the best response functions, you can calculate dominant strategies just by using the best response functions. Okay? That's the end of this video.